Your Honor, this is the first time I have had the privilege of addressing you as mayor, as opposed to sitting with you in some academic, boring meeting where we each got an hour to speak. So speaking for 5 minutes only is extremely painful. But thank you for giving me the privilege to do so. I'm going to do 3 points, and desperately I will try to say within 5 minutes before you shut me up. First, I want to give a little bit of history. 2, I want to praise Andy Yan. And 3, I want to talk about land prices. First, the history. I am one of the first to have been guilty of gentrifying our particular neighborhood. I live to reveal this, at one of the houses pre-World War I on the south side of Kitchener behind the project. And when we first moved here in roughly 1980, our house cost $60,000. The land price is now $1.3 million, which is an indication of just how absurd have become land prices. At the time, I dabbled in real estate development. Just looking at me, you know that I'm not a developer. I managed to do this exercise on a lot that was kitty corner from our house on the northwest corner of our house in the next block, in the 1400 block, on which had been a crack house. And I dabbled in that because my brother is an architect. The city was extremely grateful to do this, and they were extremely supportive to my dabbling in real estate to try and generate some reasonable housing. We built a fourplex within the RM4 rules. Various people tonight have done similar things. In the 1980s, there was fear that this neighborhood was going to turn into the downtown east side. Then came stability. Then came people who did loving work on what was, coincidentally, a survival of approximately a dozen character homes on the particular block with 99-foot lots, no lane, on either the north side of Grant or the south side of Kitchener. And many of these people here have expressed their frustration at what might happen because this is, I don't think, a suitable project for this site. Second point, Andy Yan. I have the privilege, for many reasons, I am still working full-time at my job as a professor at Simon Fraser University. And Andy and I have many occasions to discuss. Andy's thesis sums up that successful neighborhood preserving change must be incremental. I leave it up to you ultimately to decide whether this project is incremental. And I would argue strongly it is not. That it might be considered incremental were it on a main artery, but to go into the middle of the RM zoning in the Grandview Woodland area and accept this as one of the first major projects since the neighborhood plan was approved and make this into what we do, where the great majority of the RM4 housing is incrementally changed since I first came, going from threat of downtown east side, to be blunt, into much more modified accommodation while preserving a fair amount of the old housing stock, the old rental stock, which is providing, admittedly not enough, affordable rental. Point number 3 is the land price issue. The developers are making the case, which is legitimate, that they are providing rental accommodation, 35 units. But I invite you to think of it in terms of my income. Given the rents, given the CMHC preference that people not spend more than 30% of their income on housing, I could not afford the 3-story. I could afford the 3-bedroom. I could afford the 2-bedroom. If I was prepared to spend 40% of my income, I could afford the rent for the 3-bedroom. I undoubtedly have, as an upper middle class professor, tenured, a much above average income. This project, if I think it proceeds, will be a blockbuster. It is quite likely to invite a lot of further requests to build 6-story projects, rental within the neighborhood. It's not going to provide rental accommodation for middle-class families. Now, status quo is not particularly satisfactory, but I suspect that the status quo is providing, via the preservation of old rental stock and a considerable amount of secondary and third, either legal or illegal suites in the existing single-family homes, is providing more rental. I mean, the ultimate answer here is that we have allowed, in the last decade, land prices to be so high that they have destroyed the ability of developers to provide rent, which is rental accommodation, which is affordable to ordinary people. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you have a number of questions.
I'm interested in understanding your thoughts around incrementalism, and thank you for referencing Andy Yan. You're probably aware that we have a character home program in the city that gives additional FSR to allow greater density where you do have pre-World War II, pre-1940s houses. Is that what you mean by incremental density? You know, say you went up to half a dozen different units on a single-family lot?
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
I mean, some of the housing in this particular development application is well below the RM4 limits. And certainly there's been a lot of what I would classify as incremental development having taken place in the neighborhood, where maybe a not very good shape pre-World War II house was demolished, and in its place was a fourplex, which fits, and it doesn't create any of the problems which my neighbors have discussed all through the evening. That is incremental. It is probably not diminishing the amount of relatively affordable rental, because these fourplexes often have renters living in them formally or informally.
I'm just interested in trying to figure out how we can get as many dwelling units as possible without blockbusting, I guess. Gentle density, it's referred to in some quarters.
You have a very difficult job as a council. I'm not in any way wanting to envy your position. I just put it to you that the idea of, in effect, transforming Grandview Woodland into, in 10 years' time, a version of Yaletown is not a good solution. I desperately hope there are aggressive policies to limit speculation, limit offshore purchasing of real estate, which may slowly bring down the prices. It's always going to be a high-price city. I grew up in Saskatchewan, and we're never going to get the prices of Moose Jaw. But there's no need for prices in this town to have done what they have done in the last decade. And we're living the consequences of that. So I trust that you aggressively push the province to maintain its policies to restrict speculation in real estate, restrict foreign purchasing. But it's not easy.
But outside our purview of the conversation tonight, well, we can talk about it, but this particular rezoning application and its implications, to a person, everyone has said that they agree that we need greater density and density in this neighborhood. And so we have to figure out how to accomplish that, and hopefully in a way that doesn't bust the block. That's my concern, and so I wanted to hear.
My concern is that with approving a project of this scale in the midst of what is a mix of good character, not so good character, owner-owned and rental accommodation, is likely to produce a Yale in 10 to 20 years, because the people who can afford to live in these two-bedroom apartments need to have a salary like mine, which is a professional salary as a university professor.
Thank you.